the WBC belt that has included Ali, the greatest of all time. They are set and ready to answer who's the greatest of right now. Wilder-Fury 2, here we go.
News! Okay, we'll start with this. Well, news broke today per a tweet from Michael Benson. Derek Chisora has appointed Buddy McGirt as his new trainer for the Joseph Parker fight on May 1st, and Parker is now trained by Andy Lee. We talked about that here on the channel, that Joseph Parker has since parted ways with his longtime trainer, Kevin Barry, due to what can only be described as proximity issues. Better still, Derek Chisora has made a change of his own to his corner. He's going to be trained by veteran trainer Buddy McGirt. In some circles, the move is being viewed as too little and too late for Derek Chisora. But I don't know if I agree with that, because I saw a similar sentiment expressed when Sergey Kovalev enlisted the aid of Buddy McGirt ahead of the Elaytor-Alvarez fight, the Elaytor-Alvarez title fight. Some of you out there might recall that Elaytor-Alvarez upset Sergey Kovalev in what was to be a defense of his WBO title. Sergey Kovalev enlists the aid of Buddy McGirt, and it made a difference.
It did.
Sergey won the title back.
He did.
That being said, before this news broke that Derek Chisora enlisted the aid of Buddy McGirt, I still viewed this fight as a fight that was up for grabs, given Derek Chisora's very aggressive, come-forward style, Joseph Parker being a fighter who many times is characterized as not having a mean streak, not having any spite, not having any dog in him. A fighter who does have ability.
He does have skill.
But what he doesn't have are killer instincts. Long gone are the days of Joseph Parker, who was a
meaner guy,
pretty good body puncher when he was coming up those ranks. These days, he's a more complacent, a more polite heavyweight than
before
he used to be. And given how aggressive Derek already is, the fact that Derek has nothing to lose, he doesn't have an O to protect. It's a fight that, to me, was very much up for grabs. More so now that Derek Chisora is implementing these kinds of changes to his corner. I mean, that lets you know what kind of mental state Derek is in. He doesn't just want to show up and perform. He wants to win. There were some gripes expressed when news first broke of this card that it was going to be billed as a Sky Sports pay-per-view over there in the United Kingdom, as opposed to here in the United States, where you'll be able to see it as part of your DAZN subscription. Many of the Brits, they expressed some discontent. Some of them that, you shouldn't have to pay that kind of scratch to see Derek Chisora in action. I didn't agree with those people, because the going rate for a pay-per-view here in the United States far exceeds the going rate for a pay-per-view over there in the United Kingdom. And at least when Derek Chisora is fighting, you know he's going to make a fight of it. You know that he's going to try to win the match as best as he can and put the man opposite the ring in a very compromising position. I think that this news makes the fight that much more attractive, that much more appealing, because I told you, it looked like a fight that, to me, it's not a foregone conclusion. It's not a foregone conclusion that Joseph Parker wins in spite of having less career blemishes than Derek. Derek Chisora, he's got a professional record of 32 wins, 10 losses. 10 losses on his professional record, his resume. And boxing is a lot more nuanced than what you see on paper, You shouldn't read too much into those 10 losses. You shouldn't tell yourself that because Derek has 10 losses, this is some kind of picnic, or it's going to be for Joseph Parker. That's not the case.
It's not.
I remind you, many years ago, Mickey Ward squared off with Emmanuel Augustus, and Emmanuel Augustus had something like 17 losses on his record ahead of that fight. And he gave Mickey Ward a hard fight. Gave him a lot to work around. He did. Many years ago, Michael Moorer took on Bert Cooper. Bert Cooper had something like 8 losses ahead of that Michael Moorer fight. He did. And it was a knockdown, drag-out brawl between Michael and Bert. Both tasted the canvas 2 times in that fight.
That fight wasn't no picnic.
So, here today in 2021, The most I can say is don't let the number of losses on Derek Chisora's resume fool you into thinking that Joseph Parker is going to make short work of him. It's not a foregone conclusion that Joseph wins. Derek Chisora is a fighter that has nothing to lose, and that makes him a very dangerous fighter to some of these guys like Joseph Parker, who here today is going to be in an experimental phase with his new trainer, his new corner, Andy Lee. What can Joseph Parker add to his repertoire ahead of this fight, having Andy Lee in his corner, as opposed to Derek Chisora, who's a veteran himself, and who will have the veteran experience of Buddy McGirt? Like I said before, I like the card in its entirety. You know, Chris Eubank Jr. is on there, and But Dimitri Bivol is going to be back in action on this card. The amateur rivalry between Katie Taylor and Natasha Jonas has been rekindled. That's going to be the co-main event to the main event between Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora, who, you'll excuse me for saying so, makes for a great night of boxing, because it's not a foregone conclusion that Joseph wins. He can't be on cruise control in this fight. Lightweight news per tweet from Michael Benson. Teofimo Lopez Sr. on his son's purse bid. We're showing boxers they're worth more than what promoters think. We took a stand. This is like when Muhammad Ali stood for his rights. He didn't want to fight in the Vietnam War. It's the same shit we're doing with my son. And, this quote from Senior, it's not being received well by a lot of people because that's not an adequate parallel. I mean, it really isn't,
It isn't.
What Muhammad Ali took a stand for was bigger than just the fighter's worth, was bigger than just the boxing match, was bigger than boxing in and of itself. What Muhammad Ali took a stand for were his rights as a human being and human rights overall. And Teofimo Lopez having a tiff with his promoter based on what his purse was going to be, that's not the same thing. And don't get me wrong, Teofimo Lopez sent a powerful message, not just to his own promoter, but to a lot of fighters out there who are happy to let other people control their careers and make all the decisions for them. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to undermine what Teofimo Lopez did, because he sent a powerful message to his promoter and a powerful message to a lot of young fighters out there that you can be the captain of your ship. You can take control. He did send a very powerful message to many individuals out there, but that does not equate to the message that Muhammad Ali sent to everyone, not just in the world of boxing, but in the world overall,
All of it.
by deciding not to fight in the Vietnam War. Given the political and racial climate at that time, these are more comfortable times than those were. And what Teofimo is fighting for isn't necessarily human rights, the way that Muhammad Ali was fighting for human rights. I mean, one situation was quite literally a matter of life and death. Another situation is a disgruntled fighter who thinks he should get more money. You tell me if those two things equate to one another.
I mean, seriously, how are those two things alike?
How's fighting for a bigger purse equate to the stand that Muhammad Ali made to the U.S. government?
The stand that he took.
I think a more adequate parallel for what Teofimo Lopez did here would be Floyd Mayweather Jr. parting ways with Top Rank, feeling that he was worth more than what the people at Top Rank thought he was, that he had more potential to be a top-earning fighter than what they expressed. I mean, if there's a parallel that applies here to Teofimo Lopez's situation with Top Rank, the Floyd Mayweather Jr. parallel makes a lot more sense.
Supposed to be Muhammad Ali because he wanted more money?
Well, I guess that makes me the new age Sporty Lewis or Howard Cosell.
Blow things out of proportion, why don't you?
Because that's what Teofimo Lopez Sr. is doing. I've had mixed feelings about that fiasco from the very beginning, because I don't think that Bob Arum was off base when he felt that the Kambosos Jr. fight really only has a certain value. It's only going to generate but so much money. I don't think he was off base in that assertion. But at the same time, I think he mishandled the situation. It didn't have to come to this.
Todd Dubois fucked up.
And what can only be described as attempted collusion, attempting to collude the purse bid by emailing Eddie Hearn and in so many words, asking him not to place a bid as a favor to Top Rank, attempting to, in so many words, rig the purse bid to keep the fight's market value within a certain dollar amount, within a certain figure. That was a very poor decision from Todd Dubois, very poor decision from the people over there at Top Rank. I maintain my original position that Bob wasn't off base when he said what he said about the fight, and the prudent thing to do in that situation is to let it go to a purse bid, which it did, and let somebody else flip the bill for the fight, regardless of who it is, because you're going to get your percentage regardless. You'll end up with a surplus of money for having not paid for the fight and letting somebody else pick up the tab, whether it's Matchroom or Triller. And once that engagement is over, Teofimo Lopez goes right back to the Top Rank ESPN side of things. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
It could have been that simple.
But because the people over there at Top Rank attempted to collude with Matchroom, collude with Eddie Hearn, and Teofimo Lopez and his team were made aware of it, now there's a lot of hard feelings. There's a lot of love lost, and Teofimo, he doesn't want to go back to Top Rank. He doesn't want to go back.
And can you really blame him?
I wouldn't liken this situation to the stand that Muhammad Ali took against the U.S. government and the draft, the war at that time. I wouldn't liken this situation to that situation, but I will say that I understand where Teofimo Lopez is coming from, and I sympathize. I get it. He felt that if he puts himself out there, he can perhaps get himself more money than the people at Top Rank were willing to put up. And in that way, he's vindicated. In that way, he's right. Because for this fight, he's worth more to Triller than he was to Top Rank.
Even if the fight ain't a big fight.
Finally, very revealing set of comments from Bob Arum, who very recently spoke to Barbershop Conversations. So many words. Bob said he expects a determination from the Fury versus Wilder III arbitration to come in May. Asked if the AJ fight depends on this, he said no. Nobody anticipates that there will be an injunction. At worst, there might be a claim for damages. And as all of this plays out, it's up to us,
Me and you.
the members of the boxing community, to decipher what all of this really means. And I want to say that Bob's not speaking in code. When he says that, at worst, there may be a claim for damages, that goes right back to that report from January of this year that specified that this mediation arbitration, it's not for a third Wilder versus Fury fight, it's for a compensation package.
It's for a payout.
Which in essence goes back to what I told you guys in a previous video. If you guys believe that Deontay Wilder has been paid to step aside in one way, shape, or form, or is attempting to be paid to step aside, you then have to believe that if they're paying him to step aside, it must be so that the Joshua versus Fury fight can come off. Otherwise, why would they pay him anything at all? And it's not a given, it's not a guarantee that he's even being paid to step aside. Bob Arum, in so many words, is saying that at worst, that's what might happen.
They might try to file a claim for damages.
Whether or not that's a valid claim is anybody's guess. Filing a claim for damages incurred by who?
Who?
Deontay Wilder? And these damages, in this hypothetical scenario, these damages that they try to sue for, who's on the hook for these damages? Because it's not Tyson Fury, Top Rank, and Frank Warren's fault that the coronavirus shut the industry down. In order for them to be on the hook for that, well, you'd essentially be blaming them that the third fight didn't happen, when we all know the third fight didn't happen because coronavirus affected not just the industry, but the world, and in that way, that's an act of God. If the third fight between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury didn't happen in 2020, it has everything to do with both sides wanting the fight to happen in front of a capacity crowd, in front of a live audience. And neither the Top Rank people or the PBC people, the Wilder people, neither side of this wanted to stage this fight in the absence of a live audience. So while they waited for things to go back to normal, which they still haven't, but while they waited, the contract expired.
They made $16 million at the gate from the rematch.
$16 million. And that being said, they weren't going to stage this thing behind closed doors and leave all that potential revenue on the table. So they were waiting for things to go back to normal in 2020. They just never did.
They still haven't.
In reference to the AJ fight being contingent upon what happens with this arbitration, the second phase of the mediation arbitration, I think a lot of people really weren't listening. Bob Arum let everyone know several weeks ago that the mediation is over and they are now entering into arbitration. That's where we are. That's where it's at. And in reference to that, Bob Arum let everybody know that the AJ fight isn't contingent on what happens with the arbitration because nobody's expecting an injunction.
Well, what's an injunction?
It is tantamount to a cease and desist order, something that would prevent an affected party from performing a certain action In this case, potentially going into an Anthony Joshua fight. Bob Arum, his tune hasn't changed. He's saying they're not anticipating an injunction. The fight happening is not contingent on what happens in arbitration. And at worst, the Wilder people will move to file a claim for damages, which we just talked about.
I don't even know if they're going to get that.
The Wilder people didn't suffer any damages. There were no damages incurred based on the fight not happening because it didn't cost them any money per se. They just didn't get to make any money off of the third fight. And if they didn't get to make any money off the third fight, I told you, it's because they were waiting for the crowds to come back in 2020, and they never did.
Nope.
They had no intention of staging this fight
In a bubble.
behind closed doors. I think that was a decision that was agreed upon on both sides, the Wilder side and the Fury side.
Both of them.
You're not going to stage this thing in the absence of a crowd in some studio.
You're not.
Neither side wanted to do that.
They could have.
And therein lies a dilemma for the Wilder people. That is, if the Wilder people choose to use this arbitration as a means to file a claim for damages. It's not like the fight couldn't have happened. It could have happened. It's just that it would have happened behind closed doors in the absence of an audience. But better still, the fight was still possible. The fight could have still happened. And if it didn't, it's likely because both sides agreed to wait for the crowds to come back. If that's the decision that both sides made, then you didn't suffer any damages.
The Charlo doubleheader didn't have an audience.
And neither did Fight Camp Series. I vaguely recall some Frank Warren cards that took place in a studio in the absence of an audience on BT Sport. That's basically saying that if the fight meant that much to you, you could have had it. You might not have made as much money as you wanted to make from it, but better still, the fight could have happened. And if it didn't, it's likely because the Wilder people and the Fury people both agreed to wait until the crowds come back. And while they waited, the contract expired. It's nobody's fault. It is what it is.
Team Fury ain't on the hook for that.
Neither is Queensberry, neither is Top Rank. Not if you aided in making that decision and abided by it, abided to it.
You were waiting the same way they were waiting.
It's not one way. If I had to guess, I'd have to say that looks like a mutual decision to me. You made $16 million at the gate in early February of last year. You're not about to leave that kind of potential revenue on the table for a third fight. So the Wilder people were waiting the same as the Fury people were waiting. And in that way, I don't know that the Wilder people have a legal leg to stand on when it comes to potentially filing a claim for damages, because if you file a claim for damages, whatever you suffered is the same thing that the Tyson Fury people suffered. They didn't get to make money off this fight the same way that you didn't get to make money off this fight.
If you file a claim for damages.
If you file a claim for damages based on money you didn't make in the third fight, the Fury people can turn around and do the exact same thing for money they didn't make from the third fight.
Your peas in a pod.
Because neither of you's got to make any money from the third fight in 2020, and it's no more their fault than it's your fault. So they could turn around and try to do to you what you would be attempting to do to them.
So I don't know if Wilder's going to get a payout.
It doesn't sound like he's gotten that yet. It sounds like that's the most he can aspire to. That's the most, at this point, that they can hope for. A payout.
We'll see what happens.